The world's largest aircraft was obliterated in a war, but now it might fly again. The Antonov AN-225, known as Mriya, Ukrainian for dream, was a Cold War behemoth built to carry the Soviet space shuttle. After the collapse of the USSR, it became a flying legend, hauling cargo too big for any other plane. But in February 20th, 22, during the Russian invasion, it was destroyed inside its hangar at Hostomel Airport. Most believed it was gone for good. Now, Ukraine wants to bring it back, and they've already started. But how do you resurrect a one-of-a-kind behemoth from ruins? How much money will it cost? And most importantly, when will it be able to fly? This is the story of war damage, national pride, and one impossible comeback already in motion. Only the Cold War could justify building a plane this absurdly massive. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union needed something no one had ever attempted: a flying platform big enough to haul the Buran space shuttle and the Energia rocket across continents. That demand didn't just push boundaries, it tore them apart. The solution was an aircraft that went far beyond the AN-124. What they designed was nearly a new species of airframe, the Antonov AN-225. It kept the same high-wing layout and general cargo philosophy of the AN-124, but nearly everything else was stretched: longer wingspan, heavier frame, more power. The AN-225 featured 6 Progress D18T turbofan engines, 32 wheels, and a unique twin vertical stabilizer system mounted on a T-tail. No aircraft that large had ever flown with that configuration, and it required a completely new approach to structural balance. Engineers had to reimagine how stress moved through the airframe. Carrying oversized loads on the fuselage created massive aerodynamic instability, especially at high speeds. The engines had to be placed to offset torque imbalances, fuel flow strain, and wing flexing. Even the landing gear had to be custom built to distribute weight across enough contact points to avoid runway damage. Despite the design headaches, the first flight took place in December 1988. Within months, it stunned the aviation world at the 1989 Paris Air Show. Crowds watched as the AN-225 soared overhead with the Buran shuttle bolted to its spine, an image straight out of science fiction. The plane was a flying monument to Soviet ambition, one that told the West, we can build anything. But as the Cold War faded and the space program collapsed, the AN-225 needed a new purpose. And what came next turned this one-off military marvel into a civilian legend. By the early 2000s, the Cold War had ended, and the Buran shuttle program was scrapped. Most expected the Antonov AN-225 to remain parked forever, a relic too expensive to maintain. But in 2001, it was pulled from storage, upgraded, and certified for commercial cargo operations. From that point forward, it found a second life in a completely different world. Once modified with updated avionics and reinforced systems, the AN-225 started doing what no other aircraft could. It hauled multi-ton generators, battle tanks, and entire wind turbines, cargo that would take weeks to ship by sea, or couldn't move by land at all. Its payload capacity, speed, and oversized loading abilities made it the go-to option for impossible missions. It didn't just get the job done. It set over 200 world records, from heaviest payload to longest cargo to highest altitude with freight of its class. In the air cargo industry, the AN-225 became known as the final option. When nothing else worked, this was the plane that answered the call. Its work wasn't limited to industry either. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it flew emergency supply runs across Europe and Asia, transporting protective gear and medical materials when supply chains were locked. These missions weren't symbolic. They were high-capacity flights that delivered on tight timelines when lives depended on it. And somewhere along the way, it became more than a machine. The AN-225 gained a global following. Airport crowds gathered to watch it take off. Enthusiasts tracked its routes online. Photographers flew across countries for a single glimpse of the plane rolling down the runway. Every appearance became a public event. But even legends can't fly forever. The AN-225 was always a one-off, and in 2022, that made it more vulnerable than ever. In just 24 hours, the world's most iconic aircraft was reduced to a burnt skeleton. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. One of the first strategic targets was Hostomel Airport, just outside Kiev, home to Antonov Airlines and the legendary AN-225. As Russian forces stormed the airfield, gunfire and airstrikes tore through hangars, runways, and parked aircraft. Caught in the middle of it all was Mriya. The AN-225 wasn't flying that day. It was undergoing maintenance, partially disassembled and completely grounded. As the battle intensified, the aircraft remained trapped in its hangar. When the dust settled, Ukrainian troops retook Hostomel. However, it was too late. Mriya was gone. The cockpit had been blasted open. The wings collapsed. The entire nose section burned out. Only scorched pieces of the airframe remained, charred and broken beneath a ruined roof. Almost immediately, a storm of questions followed. Why hadn't it been evacuated sooner? Could it have escaped to another airport? Was there time to save it before the invasion reached Kyiv? For many Ukrainians, the destruction felt like a preventable loss, and few were more vocal than Dmytro Antonov, the chief pilot of the aircraft. In a public video, he directly criticized Antonov management for ignoring warnings, failing to act, and leaving the plane exposed. His words sent shockwaves through the aviation world. The video sparked internal investigations, public outcry, and accusations of negligence. Officials scrambled to explain the decisions made in the hours before the assault. The Ukrainian Security Service eventually opened a case into possible sabotage or mismanagement. The image of the wrecked AN-225 spread quickly. Pilots, engineers, and aviation fans worldwide reacted with disbelief. In aviation circles, this was an enormous tragedy. As the ashes cooled, one question began rising from the wreckage. Could Mriya return? Before the first AN-225 ever flew, a second one had already begun taking shape. Soviet planners didn't just dream of one Mriya, they started building two. The first took to the skies. The second stayed behind, half-finished, waiting for a mission that never came. When the USSR collapsed in the early 1990s, work stopped completely. What remained, nearly two-thirds of a complete aircraft, was sealed away in storage. That forgotten fuselage may now be the key to everything. It never flew. It was never completed, but its structure survived, untouched by war or time. And today, it's being positioned as the core of the rebuild. Not a replica, a real continuation. The effort is starting from aluminum, steel, and rivets that have been sitting quietly for decades. The rebuild gets another boost from Antonov's deep familiarity with the AN-124. The two airframes share more than just design DNA. Landing gear, wing assemblies, cockpit components, many of them can be adapted straight from existing stock. Even better, 35% of what's needed to complete the new Mriya already exists. It's been logged, checked, and in some cases, pulled out of storage for inspection. Then there's the wreckage. The original Mriya, destroyed in 2022, wasn't completely lost. Some parts, reinforced bulkheads, internal fittings, sealed electronics, are still usable. Engineers plan to extract what they can, cannibalizing the old aircraft to give life to the new one. Nothing about this is quick. Nothing is guaranteed. But it's happening. From rusted hangars and twisted wreckage, Ukraine is assembling something the world thought was gone forever. The next challenge was turning decades-old parts into a modern aircraft ready for flight, and paying for it. Because building a giant like this means opening the door to an even bigger number, the cost. The Antonov AN-225 of May have been designed in the Soviet era, but its rebirth is being driven by a far more modern force, global support. What began as a national recovery effort has expanded into something larger, an international campaign fueled by aviation enthusiasts, tech companies, and symbolic gestures that span continents. Soon after the destruction at Hostomel, the aviation community began organizing. Volunteers created online fundraisers. Engineers shared technical drawings. Even model builders and hobbyists got involved, producing detailed replicas to raise awareness and cash. In Ukraine, several startups began 3D printing scale models of the Mriya, selling them worldwide to support the Rebuild initiative. Each model came with a story, a mission, and a small but meaningful financial contribution. One of the biggest signals of support came from Microsoft. In early 2023, the AN-225 was added to Microsoft Flight Simulator, complete with detailed flight dynamics and visual fidelity. The proceeds from the aircraft's download were pledged to help fund restoration efforts. For millions of players, flying the Mriya digitally became a way to contribute in the real world. Donations began to arrive from across the globe. Individuals in the United States, aviation clubs in Germany, and organizations in Canada and Japan sent money, parts, and technical assistance. The support wasn't always large in scale, but it was persistent, and it reminded everyone watching that this wasn't just Ukraine's aircraft. It belonged to the world. Even billionaire Richard Branson took notice. Though he hasn't committed funding, he's spoken publicly in favor of the project and signaled a willingness to help. That kind of attention, even without a signed check, matters. It gives the movement visibility and brings it into boardrooms and decision-making circles that might otherwise overlook it. This kind of rebuild doesn't move forward on engineering alone. It depends on people willing to stand behind it, to support the idea long before the aircraft ever leaves the ground. And while global attention helps, the next phase requires something far more concrete: funding, steady, substantial, and sustained. Reviving the AN-225 means upgrading a 1980s machine to meet the demands of the 2020s, and that challenge runs deeper than patching up metal or reinstalling control systems. Every part of the aircraft, engines, wiring, avionics, and materials, belongs to an era that no longer exists. The original D-18T engines were powerful, but by today's standards, they're outdated. They burn too much fuel, generate too much noise, and fail to meet international emissions regulations. To fly globally, the rebuilt Mriya would need quieter, cleaner engines. But swapping them out isn't simple. New engines mean new pylons. New pylons mean structural reinforcement. Each change triggers another redesign. The deeper engineers go, the more Soviet complexity they uncover. Many of the original documents were never digitized. Some parts haven't been manufactured in decades. Even worse, the people who built the first aircraft are retiring or already gone. Knowledge gaps stretch across every subsystem, and reverse engineering often requires guesswork based on faded blueprints and archived schematics. Then there's the issue of the second airframe. Though similar, it doesn't perfectly match the destroyed aircraft. The geometry is close, but not identical. Components salvaged from the wreckage won't always line up. That forces adjustments on both sides, modifying new parts to fit old designs or reshaping the structure to accommodate what's available. Every compromise adds complexity, and every layer of complexity adds cost. Rough estimates place the baseline rebuild at around $500 million, but that only covers returning the AN-225 to flight. A full modernization, new engines, updated systems, Western certifications, could push the price closer to $3 billion. For context, that's more than the development cost of some commercial airliners. Rebuilding a legend is one challenge. Making it viable in modern skies is another. And yet, despite all this, the project keeps moving forward. Because for Ukraine, this aircraft means far more than just heavy lift capability. When your nation is under siege, is rebuilding a plane an act of hope or denial? Inside Ukraine, the idea of bringing the AN-225 back to life has sparked a fierce internal debate. On one side stands national pride, engineers, pilots, and civilians who see Mriya as a symbol worth saving. On the other side are skeptics, questioning whether now is the time to fund such a massive aviation project, while basic needs remain under strain. The war has stretched Ukraine's resources thin. Roads need repair. Hospitals face constant pressure. Military logistics remain a daily concern. Against that backdrop, pouring hundreds of millions, or even billions, into one aircraft can feel like a luxury few can justify. Critics argue that the same money could fund drone production, rebuild cities, or restock essential services across the country. Still, the government hasn't backed down. President Volodymyr Zelensky has framed the rebuild as a statement, not just to Ukrainians, but to the world. In speeches, he's described the Mriya project as a show of resilience, an example of what Ukraine can achieve despite destruction. It's less about practicality and more about legacy, about telling Russia and every future aggressor, we don't just survive, we rebuild. There's also a strategic layer to the story. A restored AN-225 could serve as a flying ambassador, appearing at air shows and humanitarian missions, drawing attention wherever it lands. Its presence alone could shape headlines, sway opinions, and keep Ukraine in the spotlight far beyond the battlefield. That type of influence, while hard to quantify, carries real diplomatic and fundraising power. But the longer the rebuild takes, the louder the questions grow. Some fear the project could spiral into a money pit. Others see it as a necessary national symbol. Expensive, yes, but worth every dollar if it helps hold the country together during its hardest chapter. There's no final verdict yet, just the tension between symbolism and survival. And that tension is exactly what makes the AN-225's future so uncertain and so powerful. The Antonov AN-225 stood for ambition, and its return speaks to something even greater. Rebuilding it means more than restoring an aircraft. It means restoring identity. However this story ends, the world is watching. For more aviation stories like this, make sure to follow and stay tuned.